Next time you drive past a modern construction site, take a moment to look at the cranes. Look at the massive steel girders, the diesel engines, the laser levels, and the GPS tracking systems. We take it completely for granted that building something monumental requires immense, noisy mechanical power. We believe that without our advanced technology, the Earth stays flat. But 4,500 years ago, none of that existed. Not a single engine, not a scrap of iron. They didn't even use the wheel for heavy transport. Yet, on a rocky plateau just outside of Cairo, stands a mountain of stone, the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is made of roughly 2.3 million stone blocks. The average block weighs 2.5 tons, with some of the massive granite beams inside the king's chamber weighing up to 80 tons. According to ancient records, it was built in a window of just over 20 years. If you do the math on that, it means the builders had to quarry, transport, carve, and perfectly place a multi-ton stone block every few minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 2 decades straight. It is a number so staggering that it makes our modern minds short-circuit. And because we cannot fathom how anyone could achieve this with simple tools, we invent myths. We tune into documentaries about ancient aliens. We speculate about lost, highly advanced civilizations that possessed sonic levitation or laser cutting tools. We assume that because their technology was primitive, their minds must have been primitive too. But the truth is actually far more spectacular than any conspiracy theory. The answer to how ancient humans built the pyramids doesn't involve magic or outer space. It involves an extraordinary, almost terrifying mastery of logistics, physics, and human organization. For centuries, the greatest mystery wasn't just how they lifted the stones, but how they managed the sheer paperwork of it all. How do you feed, house, and coordinate tens of thousands of people in the middle of the desert without computers, spreadsheets, or modern communication? In 2013, a French archaeologist named Pierre Tallet made a breakthrough that changed Egyptology forever. He was excavating a series of man-made caves at an abandoned ancient harbor on the shores of the Red Sea called Wadi al-Jarf. Deep inside one of these caves, buried for 4,500 years, he found fragments of papyrus. They turned out to be the oldest written papyri ever discovered. Among them was the personal logbook of a man named Merer. He wasn't a king or a high priest. He was an inspector, a middle manager who led a crew of about 200 elite workers. And his diary wasn't full of mystical religious spells or grand political proclamations. It was a spreadsheet. It was a daily record of logistics. Merer's logbook tracks his team over a period of several months as they transport high-quality limestone from the quarries of Tura straight to the Giza Plateau. And it reveals something incredible about the ancient landscape. The Egyptians didn't drag these multi-ton blocks across hundreds of miles of scorching open desert sand. They didn't need to. They turned the Nile River into a massive, fluid superhighway. During the annual summer floods, the Nile swelled to massive proportions. The engineers under Pharaoh Khufu took advantage of this by building an intricate network of artificial canals, massive dikes, and deep harbors right up to the base of the Giza Plateau. Merer describes loading the stones onto specialized wooden boats, sailing down the Nile, and pulling right up to the construction site. The Egyptians didn't fight nature. They engineered it, using the seasonal pulse of the planet to do the heavy lifting for them. But who were the people pulling these strings?
For generations, Hollywood has fed us the same tragic image. Thousands of miserable slaves, starving under the blazing sun, being driven to their deaths by cruel overseers with whips. It is a compelling story, but archaeology has completely dismantled it. Just a short walk from the pyramids, archaeologist Mark Lehner spent decades excavating a massive urban complex known as the Lost City of the Pyramids. This was the home of the workforce, and what he found inside the ruins shocked the scientific community. This wasn't a slave camp. It was a highly organized, state-of-the-art infrastructure project. By analyzing animal bones and organic remains, researchers discovered that the workers were eating immense amounts of high-quality beef, sheep, and goat meat, along with thousands of loaves of freshly baked bread and endless supplies of beer. They were eating better than the average Egyptian peasant. Furthermore, examinations of the workers' skeletal remains showed that they had access to advanced medical care. Skeletons showed signs of broken bones that had been perfectly set and healed, and some even showed evidence of successful, complex brain surgeries. These people weren't disposable slaves. They were a highly respected, well-fed national workforce. In fact, the workers were organized into competitive units. They left graffiti on the stone blocks deep inside the pyramid, naming their teams. They called themselves things like the Friends of Khufu or the Drunks of Menkaure. The pyramid wasn't just a tomb for a dead king, it was a nation-building project. It forced a scattered agricultural population to unite under a single goal, creating the very concept of a unified state bureaucracy, supply chains, and national identity. Still, the physical engineering problem remains. Even if you get the stones to the base of the pyramid via water, and even if your workers are well fed, how do you move a 2-ton block across the ground without wheels or horses?
In 2014, a team of physicists at the University of Amsterdam solved a riddle that had been hiding in plain sight for millennia. They were looking at an ancient wall painting from the tomb of a regional governor named Jehuti-Hotep. The painting shows a massive crew of men pulling a giant statue on a wooden sled. But there's a tiny, seemingly insignificant detail at the front of the sled, a single man standing there pouring water directly onto the sand. For decades, historians assumed this was a religious ritual, a symbolic cleansing of the path. But the physicists decided to test it. They built a laboratory model of an Egyptian sled and placed it on a bed of sand. When they tried to pull the sled across dry sand, a massive wave of sand bunched up in front of the wooden runners, drastically increasing the friction and making it incredibly difficult to move. But when they added water to the sand, something remarkable happened. The water created tiny liquid bridges between the sand grains, a phenomenon known as capillary bridges. This stiffened the sand, turning it into a smooth, hard surface, much like wet sand at the beach. The physicists discovered that if you add just the right amount of water, the required pulling force is cut exactly in half. Too much water creates mud, too little does nothing. The Egyptians had mapped out the exact friction coefficients of wet sand through rigorous empirical observation. They turned a hostile desert into a frictionless sliding board using nothing but a bucket of water. Then there's the matter of precision. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north within 1/15th of a single degree. That is a level of accuracy that matches or exceeds many modern buildings built with digital compasses and satellite mapping. How did they achieve this by looking at a blank horizon? In 2017, engineer and archaeologist Glenn Dash demonstrated how it could be done using nothing more than a wooden stick and a piece of string. He utilized a technique known as the Indian circle method. On the day of the autumn equinox, you place a stick called a gnomon into the ground. As the sun moves across the sky, the tip of the stick's shadow moves in a perfect sweeping curve. At regular intervals, you mark the tip of the shadow. At the end of the day, you take a piece of string, pin it to the stick, and draw a perfect circle through the shadow points. The circle intersects the shadow path at 2 exact locations. If you draw a line straight through those 2 intersection points, you get a near-flawless, perfect east-west line. It requires 0 advanced math. It requires no telescopes. It only requires a deep, patient understanding of the geometry of our planet's relationship with the cosmos. We often look back at the ancient world and think of them as primitive because they lacked our gadgets. We look at the pyramids and assume there must be a secret, magical ingredient we are missing. But the secret wasn't a hidden technology. The secret was an unparalleled, focused application of human intellect. They didn't have cranes, so they mastered the physics of sand and water. They didn't have computers, so they perfected the art of human bureaucracy and national organization. They didn't have satellites, so they read the shadows cast by the sun. We traded all of that deep, patient observation for mechanical power and digital speed. The true monument on the Giza Plateau isn't the stone structure itself. It is a reminder of what the human collective mind is capable of achieving when tens of thousands of people pull in the exact same direction, leaving behind a mountain of stone that outlived their empire, their language, and their gods.